New Scotland Yard, synonymous with excellence in crime solving, recognised as a world leader in murder investigation. Every year, New Scotland Yard's experienced detectives unravel the twisted truth from the tragedies that unfold across the bustling capital city of London. Uncovering evidence that nails the guilty beyond all reasonable doubt takes time, dedication, and a forensic attention to detail. This is New Scotland Yard Files. Tonight, a London hero.
He was hurt himself, but he still managed to help the other wounded.
Much loved in the community.
He was just amazing, just so much fun.
Killed in public by a savage attack.
It's animalistic, it's frenzied, it's almost out of control.
But to find out who killed David Morley, New Scotland Yard's dedicated murder squad had to piece together a myriad of clues. A complex and dramatic case that would test their investigative skills to the limit.
London. It's exciting and vibrant. Every weekend, this town becomes a nighttime playground.
At 2:57 a.m. on October the 30th, a call comes through that two men have been attacked. Minutes later, an ambulance races through the streets to St Thomas's Hospital. In the back, one of the men fights for his life. Nick Scholar is the New Scotland Yard detective in charge of the case.
I was the on-call senior investigating officer for the Homicide and Serious Crime Command and received a call saying there'd been a serious attack on the South Bank and that a man was fighting for his life, not expected to live. All attacks are savage. This one was remarkable. They beat someone to the point of death.
It's on London's South Bank that the sickening assault happens.
It had been a very serious attack against two men, not causing any problem for anyone else.
Two friends just sitting on a bench, minding their own business, chatting to each other, when suddenly they were set upon, and Alistair Whiteside managed to get away with relatively minor injuries, but his friend David was not so lucky.
The victim is 37-year-old barman David Morley. He is rushed through A&E and taken immediately into surgery with catastrophic injuries.
I could see just how terrible his injuries were. In fact, it was later described as the kind of injury you might expect if you're in a car accident or had fallen from a great height.
Doctors work tirelessly to save David, and his parents rush back from holiday to be at his bedside. But it's too late. At 7:40 p.m. on Saturday the 30th of October 2004, around 16 hours after the attack, David Morley dies. Speaking at the time, his father is understandably distraught.
He was a caring son. If there was any family problem, he just dropped everything and came home. He was a very caring son.
I'll always stay with me because I never got to see him at the end. You know, I didn't get the opportunity to go to the hospital, to hold his hand or to see him.
A post-mortem later reveals that David died of massive internal bleeding.
He was repeatedly kicked and stamped on, especially in his torso. So he suffered a number of broken ribs and a ruptured spleen, which I believe that's, what led to his death.
As the murder investigation gets fully into gear, more details emerge about the extraordinary life of David Morley.
His nickname was Cinders. because he would like to go out and about, and he had to make sure that he got back by 12. And we just hit it off. He was just amazing, just so much fun, so gregarious, so loud. David would literally just walk into the room and go, hiya, and that would be it. Everybody would be like, wow, David's here. He's in the room, and he would just hold court.
A hugely popular character on London's gay scene, in April 1999, he'd already cheated death once before.
There had been no warning. The bomb was clearly designed to bring carnage to the streets of the capital.
When the Admiral Duncan, the famous Soho gay pub he was manager of, was the target of a nail bomb attack.
When that bomb went off, he was hurt himself, but he still managed to help the other wounded. He looked after them, and then beyond that, when he was able to, he visited the others in hospital.
The best story of all is there was a gentleman who I'm still very, very close to and very good friends with, who was in a coma. I mean, he was practically gone, you know, and Cinder's just walked in, started shouting at him, said, "Oi, you, get out of that bed, somebody needs that more than you do." And he woke up, and like an angel, do you know what I mean? That's what he came over as, he was like an angel.
He really was a hero in the gay community.
He was lucky not to lose his life that day. That's what made it so awful, that he was, again, a victim of a heinous attack.
So all eyes are on Nick Scola and his team to find the killers of this much-loved figure. As day breaks, detectives scour the crime scene for obvious forensic evidence and straight away run into a problem.
The difficulty the police had in this case was that it's an outside scene. It's taken outside, it's not inside a house. You've got the victim and the assailants coming together, probably for only a very short period of time, so the potential to transfer forensic evidence may be limited. The injuries to David Morley were mainly internal also, so there's not going to be a lot of blood spill. So you're looking for possibly fibre evidence, transfer of hair, possibly transfer of saliva.
And the location of the crime scene makes it difficult for police in other ways.
The first steps taken at a scene, especially in the first hour, can have a major impact on the rest of the investigation. A scene like this that is outdoors in a very public area, that becomes a little bit more problematic. If there is no obvious CCTV overlooking it that can be viewed immediately.
In 2004, the place where David Morley was attacked was a CCTV blind spot. For the detectives, there's very little to go on. They find no weapon at the scene. There are no eyewitnesses, and they have only a sketchy recollection of events from David's traumatised friend Alistair. Plus, they are yet to find a motive.
First thoughts were robbery. A phone was stolen, and we also know that Alistair Whiteside's briefcase was taken, but it transpires it was thrown into the river. That puts a different slant on it.
Yes, I mean, things were taken, but that degree of violence is not needed in a robbery. I mean, normally for that kind of stuff, it's a snatch and run thing, isn't it? So there must have been an overtone that said, well, it wasn't really the objects that this is about. It must have occurred to the police that it's not about a phone, it's not about a briefcase, it's something else.
With an unclear motive, the police have to decode the crime scene in another way, explore other factors. One path to follow is to build a profile of the likely suspects.
2 men were attacked simultaneously, so it's very unlikely to be an individual suspect.
So the police are looking for multiple attackers, but they've got very little evidence to go on, and there's no sign of a murder weapon. And the very worrying possibility emerges that David Morley may have been targeted simply because of who he was.
Initial thoughts, David Morley had been murdered, his friend with him had been attacked by a group of youths, the exact number unknown.
Detectives are desperately trying to work out a motive for the killing. Profilers start to build a picture of who could be responsible. The violence of the attack offers some key indicators.
The violence is not just extreme, it's excessive. And that's always a distinction that we look for. Professional criminals don't generally do more than is absolutely necessary. They're very prepared to be extremely brutally violent, but not more than is necessary. And yet here we have levels of violence which indicate a real relish in the act of the killing.
And when David's sexuality is factored in, investigators formulate a possible motive.
Whilst robbery was clearly a motive, until I can be sure they weren't targeted because they were homosexual, I will treat the attacks as homophobic.
It would have been entirely logical to think this was a homophobic attack. David was absolutely unapologetic about his sexuality and overt about it, so would have drawn attention to himself potentially in that way.
The death of David Morley, a hero in the gay community, sent shockwaves through London's gay population.
Oh, it must have been massively demoralising. I mean, his survival was a beacon of hope. But ultimately to succumb to a violent attack, they must have felt unsafe and less free.
In 2004, at the time of the killing, there's real concern about an increase in homophobic assaults on the streets of the capital.
The gay community fears there's a rise in the number of homophobic attacks. Last night, a 25-year-old man was stabbed 4 times on a night bus in Highgate.
These incidents have come to public attention because someone actually died, but there are dozens of similar attacks that take place every single night of the week.
A few years earlier, the Crown Prosecution Service had announced a zero-tolerance approach towards homophobic assault. And in 2003, the Criminal Justice Act had classified it as a hate crime.
It just come into legislation. If somebody was convicted of a homophobic assault, that would be an aggravating factor if it was a racist attack. Scotland Yard were keen to make it clear that they were taking homophobic attacks very seriously.
Investigating it as a homophobic attack was important to me and the police, the main purpose being for community reassurance. When I'm investigating something, I'm doing it to bring justice for the victim and justice for his family. In circumstances like this, sometimes I'm investigating for the whole community who want to see justice if this is a hate crime and the motive is such a pathetic one, that someone wants to attack someone because of their sexuality. That person is perhaps even more dangerous.
So police now have a possible motive, that David Morley and his friend were specifically targeted because of their sexuality. But then new information comes to light that sends detectives onto different lines of inquiry, and the picture becomes much more complicated.
As the investigation developed, it certainly became apparent that David Morley and Alistair Whiteside weren't the only couple attacked that night.
In all, there are 5 different attacks in the area around Waterloo Station and the South Bank that night, near to where David Morley is viciously assaulted at 2:57 a.m.
An attack had preceded the attack on David Morley, and that had been in Lower Marsh Street.
Lower Marsh is here.
At 2:30 a.m, actor David Dobson is making his way home from work at the Old Vic Theatre when he is set upon. Crucially, he reports that his attackers were in a group, which then reinforces the police theory that they are looking for a gang.
Then, just after the attack on David Morley at 2:57 a.m, there are reports of more incidents nearby.
A short distance away in Jubilee Gardens, there were 2 further attacks.
That's by the London Eye. French tourist Frank Pitacio is sat with friends when they are violently assaulted, just after 3 a.m. Mr. Pitacio's phone is stolen. Minutes later, a man named Nigel Elliott is struck over the head with a bottle. Then the group seemingly move on to their last attack of the night at 3:20 a.m.
And as the attackers left the scene and went into Leek Street, they found a man, Wayne Miller, sleeping in a doorway and attacked him there.
5 brutal attacks in 56 minutes, an hour-long orgy of violence. It's not unreasonable to assume that these attacks, including David Morley's murder, were carried out by the same gang.
Lead Scotland Yard Detective Nick Scola knows that all too well.
If we could prove the same group had carried out all of the attacks, then identifying the attackers at any of the other sites would identify the attackers and the killers of David Morley. Logic suggested there should be a link between them, but we needed an evidential link to actually join them. If they were connected, that's good for the investigation, because solving any one of them would identify who took part in the other attacks.
The hunt is on for hard evidence from the other 4 crime scenes. Police initially look for CCTV in the hope they'll identify who is carrying out these brutal attacks. But back then, the murder squad were faced with a problem.
2004 was a very different landscape. The majority of the CCTV at that era was still analogue, which made the picture clarity a lot worse. It blurred a great deal more when you tried to blow it up, because especially in the pre-digital era, tapes tended to be overwritten, sometimes every 24 hours, sometimes every 3 days, weekly or monthly. So you had very strict time limits to try and seize that material.
So with the threat of vital evidence potentially being erased, time was of the essence. Detectives hit the streets and the phones to track down whatever footage they could find.
The police were definitely under a lot of pressure to find out who'd been behind these attacks. The key to it was, tracing every bit of CCTV footage. There's obviously quite a lot of CCTV cameras in that area of London. Sadly, there weren't any at the scene of where David was attacked, but they found some nearby.
While there may not have been any CCTV of the scene where David Morley was fatally beaten, police did turn up potentially crucial images from cameras close by. They find footage of a gang viciously assaulting actor David Dobson in Lower Marsh. This is a chilling shot of them en route at 2:30 a.m. That's less than half an hour before the attack on David Morley. Police don't yet know if it's the same gang, but it's an important first step.
Finding that CCTV was a great relief because it gave us something to go on.
Though not conclusive, the images are revealing.
Apart from showing us the clothing the attackers were wearing, the David Dobson footage was important because it almost showed the attackers' frame of mind. They were spread out across the road, they were dominating the scene, they were painting a fairly imposing picture for anyone who is going to stumble across them or come round the corner and see this group, some of whom were wearing gloves, some of whom had hoods up. They were menacing, and I think they wanted to look menacing and intended to look menacing.
New Scotland Yard detectives realised these pictures could unlock the case.
We knew if we could identify them from the first attack, it would help us identify the offenders.
With the CCTV line of inquiry moving forward, other detectives are following up on the mobile phones that were stolen that night. But this was not without its difficulties either.
Phones in 2004 weren't like the modern smartphone where you could locate where it was simply through the handset's presence. But we know if it had been used, we would know which cell site it had been used in. So that would give us an idea within some hundreds of yards of where that phone was.
Police now have numerous crime scenes to investigate.
The police had a huge problem in linking each of these cases together.
They scour each one for any physical clues they can find, and the hard work begins to pay off. One of the most potentially significant finds is a beer bottle discovered in Jubilee Gardens, near to the London Eye. Police think it's the one used by the gang to attack Nigel Elliott.
That was sent away for forensic retrieval. Back in 2004, we knew that forensic work would take a little bit longer than it currently takes.
Detailed forensic analysis of the bottle is crucial if the police are to link the attacks.
Now, the beer bottle would have been examined for a combination of DNA and fingerprints. If a full DNA profile is obtained, the chances of that coming from somebody else other than the person that it matches is about 1 in a billion.
While they might not have identified the suspects just yet, the police have unearthed clear evidence that a group of youngsters were hunting for victims in the area. and had already struck shortly before David was killed.
Once they realised that these weren't isolated incidents, it became quite high pressure because this was a concerted attack. It's the sort of thing, you're talking about the South Bank, you're talking about where everyone goes to theatre, cinema, no one would want to walk there in the evening after that.
And the thought of a gang working together makes it a terrifying prospect.
Being in a gang energises an offender. Being in a gang removes the inhibitions that offender might have had. So being in a gang, if you are a violent individual and then you become part of a gang, being in a gang is very dangerous indeed.
Detectives leading the hunt for the killers of London barman David Morley on the South Bank in October 2004 find themselves trying to piece together the jigsaw puzzle of random assaults committed at around the same time.
This pattern of just patrolling the streets to look for strangers and beat them up, the whole pitch was quite unsettling.
But intelligence is starting to come through. Police already found CCTV of a hooded gang of youths assaulting another victim close to where David was attacked, just half an hour earlier. It's very possible this could be the same gang.
CCTV was always going to be a very important line of inquiry in this attack because the eyewitness evidence was so bad.
Another lead is based on the victimology profile of David Morley, a hugely popular figure on the London gay scene. One likely motive is that this was a homophobic attack. His horrific death stirred enormous emotion in the gay community.
They came from near and far to pay their respects to the barman who they believe was beaten to death simply because he was gay.
A week after David's killing, thousands turned out to pay their respects at his memorial.
The number of people who've turned up here tonight is a measure of how popular David Morley, who was known to his friends as Cinders, actually was. There are so many people crammed into this churchyard that they're now beginning to spill out onto the street.
The people that showed up to celebrate his life, to celebrate this angel, this hero, was amazing. Absolutely amazing. And I remember going through the streets and everyone's got candles and, the gay chorus was singing and, it was amazing. It was really amazing. Then when we got to the church and I had to go on, there was people speaking, lots of different people speaking, people that had, been in the bombing of the Duncan, friends, and then, I came out and did my speech and I remember just going, if he was here, he'd just walk up on stage and just go, hiya! And everybody just cheered. It was just incredible because that's how they knew him. That was Cinders.
So the tragic death of this enormously popular character has a huge impact on the gay community and London at large. At the Yard, details emerge about the other 4 assaults in the area that night, which call the original motive police are working on into question.
Several people had been attacked. A group of French tourists, a homeless man. So it was clearly not just a group who were going around targeting gay people.
Police now have to look for motives other than hate crime. The key lies in linking all these random attacks, a real challenge for investigators.
I'm sure the police were faced with a quandary. In normal day-to-day work, they look for similarities, they look for motive. And this didn't have any of those elements. It was random, so it makes it much more difficult for the police. And then their investigation had to somehow find clues that would link those people together, even though there weren't really fundamental links. There had to be forensic links that would put them together.
Police analysed the 5 attacks as a whole to find common themes regarding the gang's behaviour.
Whilst we were looking at the bigger picture and all of the attacks, a pattern emerged that was quite unusual in that they would say something to their victim beforehand, just very briefly. Again, can only speculate as to why they did it. Whether it's to cause the victim a little bit more shock, or just put them at their ease.
Detectives are starting to notice consistency in the gang's approach to each attack. They redouble their efforts, and the painstaking search for more tangible evidence yields results. They find CCTV of the gang in Hercules Road, Kennington, at 2:25 a.m, minutes from the scene of the first attack on actor David Dobson. The timestamp would suggest the gang are just embarking on their violent rampage. At 3 a.m, CCTV also snaps the same youths on the South Bank, just after the David Morley beating. And as well as surveillance footage, other firm clues are emerging.
Other important forensic evidence included a beer bottle that was found in Jubilee Gardens.
Police found the beer bottle just along the South Bank from where David Morley was attacked at 2:57 a.m. They knew it was the bottle used to hit a man called Nigel Elliott over the head nearby at 3:15 a.m. Minutes earlier, elsewhere in the gardens, French tourist Frank Pitacio had been drinking beer from a bottle with friends when they were attacked. Could it be the same bottle? Police had suspicions that the gang had snatched the bottle from one victim and then used it to attack the next. And their suspicions were right.
Forensics were able to tell us the bottle taken from Frank Pitacio was used in the attack on Elliott.
Forensic evidence solidly connects the Nigel Elliott and Frank Pitacio attacks to the same gang. It's a huge result for detectives.
That was important because we're trying to link the same group to all of the attacks, and this linked two attacks definitively.
So there you had DNA from one group transferring to the next person to be attacked and therefore linking the two together. Well, that was really the first proper physical evidence that these crimes were linked. I mean, you had bits of CCTV, you had groups who looked familiar, similar, but there was nothing definite. The quality of the photography wasn't definite. So this one piece of physical evidence that took us from one victim some way away to the next victim and linked the two was the real beginnings of a case.
The net is closing, but they still don't know who the attackers are yet. That all begins to change thanks to another piece of evidence that's thrown up by the assault on Frank Pitacio.
During the attack on Frank Pitacio, his phone was stolen. And although that phone was only used once, we traced who that phone call was made to. When we interviewed her, she told us the call had been made to her by someone called Reece Sargent, who was her boyfriend.
You know, it's one of those sort of dumb criminal things to do because I think most criminals realise how easy it is to trace phone calls.
Finally, they have a name. 21-year-old Reece Sargent from Kennington. He had called his girlfriend at 4:03 a.m. on Frank Pitacio's phone.
So, as well as putting Reece Sargent at the scene, because the bottle at that scene was found to have hit Nigel Elliott, that linked Reece Sargent to both those crime scenes.
There was no doubt Reece Sargent had been involved in both incidents. But there is still one further assault the police are hoping will provide even more evidence. The final attack on Wayne Miller, sleeping rough in Leake Street, round the back of Waterloo Station at 3:20 a.m. Security cameras catch the gang en route to the scene, and this provides detectives with the most critical evidence in the investigation so far.
The most significant turning point in the case was finding the CCTV in Leake Street.
The astonishing CCTV footage gives police their first glimpse of the gang in brutal action.
You couldn't identify any of the people involved because they had their backs to the camera, they had hoodies on, etc. It was dark. There's a homeless man, Wayne Miller. I think he's asleep at that time in the morning.
And he's completely defenceless. They're kicking him, they are attacking him, they are absolutely vicious and remorseless and relentless.
For investigators, the harrowing footage provides vital insight into the gang's mentality.
The attack is actually quite coordinated. It's almost as if it's been choreographed, which shows just how powerful the psychological processes of being part of a gang can be. As one of them attacks, then the next offender then moves in, and it's as if he's feeding off his co-offender's violent activity. This
is not a group who are sort of recoiling from their own violence. They're actually, getting a buzz out of it. It's like a scene out of Clockwork Orange.
In the footage, 3 of the gang are seen carrying out the beating, but on closer examination, it also shows something even darker when investigators focus on the 4th member.
That CCTV is quite revealing of the killers. One of the suspects appearing to record it.
The whole sickening attack is being videoed on a camera phone.
That is just stimulating. It's acting as a further catalyst. It's making them act with a relish, act with an almost showman-type quality here. The uncontrolled nature of the violence does speak of, potentially, of very young offenders, offenders with no control over their behaviour at all.
And as police study the gruesome footage, they realise the gang left crucial clues.
I think the police watched that footage many times, and there would have been a eureka moment when they suddenly realised that one of the defendants had put his hand on that sort of silver metal door.
This is a key moment that could lead detectives to uncover the identities of their prime suspects.
We were able to send forensic experts to the scene, and they were able to identify specifically where those suspects had touched on the door and retrieved fingerprints from that surface.
It's a tense time as police wait to discover if the suspect's prints are in the system.
If fingerprints are developed on this door, they will be searched against a national fingerprint system. It's called basically NAFIS, National Automated Fingerprint Identification System. Now that will contain fingerprints of people known to police. So if it's searched on there, it will give a potential sort of match to a list of people.
After hours of computer time, as the database churns through thousands of prints, the results come back, and it's a big win for the detectives.
The fingerprints retrieved identified 2 more members of the gang. They were Darren Case and David Blenman. Their fingerprints were on file. So through our investigations, we now had 3 suspects identified.
The 3 suspects all live in Kennington, an area close by in South London. Detectives deduce the other member of the gang seen filming the attack is 14-year-old Chelsea O'Mahony, who lived on the same tough estate as the other suspects and is frequently seen hanging around with them.
It's time for the police to act. So they move in and arrest the entire gang. Detectives are confident they're on the money now, having identified the chief suspects. Though having arrested the gang, they need to make sure they've got enough evidence to convict them.
Although there was no direct physical evidence linking the group to David Morley, we had evidence linking them to the final attack scene, and the route they took them past David Morley. So the evidence against them was circumstantial, but it was compelling.
On the 8th of November 2004, just over a week after the death of David Morley, Scotland Yard detectives arrest the gang who they are sure killed him. They are 21-year-old Rhys Sargent, 18-year-old Darren Case, David Blenman, 17, and most surprising of all, a 14-year-old girl, Chelsea O'Mahony, who filmed one of the attacks that night on a mobile phone. When police go to question her, the girl confesses to being involved. But frustratingly, when her phone is examined, they are unable to recover any evidence.
Camera phones were quite in their infancy at the time. Nowadays, I think most phones, the police, they can retrieve data no matter how many times you've deleted it or you think you've deleted it everywhere. But in those days, certainly the police in this case couldn't find that footage or those pictures that Chelsea O'Mahony had clearly filmed.
And there's another problem. While police have successfully linked the gang to the other attacks around the South Bank that night, they are yet to tie them to the killing of David Morley and the assault of his friend Alistair Whiteside, who had his phone stolen. But then detectives find the missing piece of the puzzle.
The SIM card that had been in Whiteside's phone was found discarded very near the home addresses of some of the group.
The SIM card is the final evidence investigators need and links the gang unequivocally to the murder of David Morley. And when they search the home of the youngest suspect, even more details emerge about the sort of teens they're dealing with.
When we arrested Chelsea O'Mahony and searched her address, we found a diary. And entries in that diary clearly indicated this wasn't the first time the gang had done this.
In her diary entry from Sunday the 3rd of October 2004, Omani adopts a form of Jamaican patois.
Them lot bang up some old homeless man, which I think was bad mind, even though I was laughing after though.
They had their own name for it. They used to call it all-nighters. And they would go out and look for vulnerable people to attack. This was perhaps the first time that they had done so many attacks in one evening. But their attacks did seem to be becoming more frequent and more violent.
Detectives are now convinced and charge the group with the murder of David Morley. Based on the evidence they've painstakingly gathered and interviews they've conducted with the suspects, police are able to form a clear picture of what actually happened.
The night of violence began at 2:30 a.m. on October the 30th, 2004, when David Dobson was assaulted in Lower Marsh.
The gang heads off in the direction of the South Bank and the fatal assault on David Morley at 2:57 a.m.
David Morley was sitting by the river chatting to a friend when he was attacked by the teenagers. The gang followed this route. They had a game where one of them would say a code word, and it would be a signal to the others to set upon a stranger.
After the savage attack, which leaves David Morley barely clinging to life, the gang move here to Jubilee Gardens just after 3 a.m. And it is here that they attack the 3 French tourists. They take a mobile phone and the beer bottle from Frank Pitasio. And it is that bottle that they use to attack Nigel Elliott nearby. Police find that bottle, and it proves to be a vital clue.
When they examined it forensically, they found evidence of the tourist group which had been involved in the previous attack. So there you had DNA from one group transferring to the next person to be attacked and therefore linking the two together.
The final attack is at 3:20 when the gang get to Leek Street and set upon Wayne Miller, who's sleeping rough in a doorway.
They're kicking him, they are attacking him. He wasn't in any position to defend himself. And you can see that one of the kids is filming on a telephone.
Chelsea O'Mahony appears to film the attack for fun, but the gang leave vital evidence at the scene.
CCTV footage showed the attackers leaning up against a steel metal door. Providing that steel metal door was fairly flush and shiny, that was amenable to fingerprint treatment.
And in fact, the police are able to retrieve prints of 2 of the gang at the scene, Darren Case and David Blenman. The final evidence tying the gang to the death of David Morley is the SIM card out of Alistair Whiteside's phone, found at the home of the assailants. David's friend had his phone and briefcase stolen when they were attacked. In January 2006, the case goes to trial. Chelsea O'Mahony is one of the youngest murder suspects ever to be tried at the Old Bailey.
I think one of the most memorable things was the description of Chelsea O'Mahony kicking his head, like a football, as if she was taking a penalty or something. So it was a horrific image.
Do you know what? I'm actually really, really relieved that there was no CCTV for that one. Because we saw an awful lot for the others and it's horrendous to watch.
The court is visibly shocked by the graphic details of her role in the killing of David Morley.
What came out in the trial was that she had approached David Morley and said, "We're making a documentary about happy slapping." Posed for the camera, and it was with that level of coldness and calculation. And then they proceeded to attack him.
When footage of the gang's vicious behaviour was released to the press, it caused outrage, with many pointing to this being part of a dangerous new trend.
It appeared they were doing it almost as a recreational pursuit. That was a time when happy slapping was very much in the news.
Well, at that time, sort of 2003, 2004, this craze of happy slapping, as it became known, people using these new mobile phones which had cameras to attack people and film it and show it off to their friends.
The existence of the video adds another thrill component. They can relive over and over again the sensations, the emotions, the thrill they got out of carrying out this offence.
The defendants had grown up together on the same tough Kennington estate, but now, faced with the full force of the criminal justice system, the gang quickly crumbles.
As soon as things got tough in court, they all blamed each other. Maybe not surprisingly, once they realised that someone had died, this was a murder case, this was serious, they all started to accuse each other of being the most violent or being the leader or the one with the ideas. Well, that's known as a cutthroat defence, you know, where they all accuse each other.
This isn't a question of honour among thieves, or it's not a question of loyalty to each other. Their only bond was in the glee of the offending experience. So remove that and the bond is gone.
With extensive evidence, prosecutors in this emotional murder trial were confident of a conviction. But there was one more twist to come in this complex case, when the jury returned to deliver their verdicts.
I suppose the decision to go for manslaughter rather than murder probably had several facets. I mean, these were young people. Also, did they actually go out to kill anyone? Or were they just going on a rampage of violence? We don't know, but I can understand why, really, a manslaughter verdict was easier for the jury to deal with.
On the 23rd of January 2006, the judge, Brian Barker, the Common Sergeant of London, hands down the sentences to the gang. Reece Sargent, Darren Case and David Blenman are all sentenced to 12 years for manslaughter and 6 for the conspiracy to commit grievous bodily harm. Chelsea O'Mahony, now 16, gets 8 years for the killing and 5 for the GBH conspiracy charge.
The sentence of 12 years is a significant one, and each of them will spend a long time in prison where they can cause no further injury or harm to the people of London.
The group were charged with murder and eventually convicted of manslaughter, which is still a conviction for killing somebody.
They succeeded in their investigation. They found the perpetrators and they got them convicted. OK, it wasn't murder, but their sentences together sum up to 44 years. That's quite something, and it meant that those people were found and were off the streets.
This was yet another example of the detectives at New Scotland Yard bringing killers to justice.